Hi guys, welcome back. This is Caroline, and in today's tutorial we'll be painting on my sketchbook. And as you all know, I've been obsessed with painting on sketchbook. I've been enjoying very much the experience. And just to share with you, last tutorial, or was it a few weeks ago, we painted the sunflower fields, and I really like how it turned out. And we have all these very bright summery yellow flowers, very cheerful landscapes. And I thought of doing something similar for today's tutorial, and instead of sunflower we'll be doing tulips farm, and this is what we will be painting today. If you'd like to paint along, do join me. But before we move on, I'd like to talk a little bit on this sketchbook. This sketchbook is from Etcher, and they sent me a few other items together with this sketchbook, and I've done a separate review video on this, and I did a demo with this loose painting of the rose garden. I talked about how the paper feels and how the results turn out. So if you're interested, do check it out. I'll put the link also in the description below. And this type of painting only requires a layer, so I thought of trying it out with this painting where it requires multiple layering, which requires lots of heavy washes. And with this scenery, we'll be able to see how the paper handles the colors and the pigments. So towards the end of this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the sketchbook, and for now, let's get into the painting. Let's start off with a simple sketch. I think I will have 2/3 of the paper having the farms, and then we have the florals, and then we have 1/3 of the sky with the windmill on top here. So I'll just sketch out the horizon like this. Feel free to tape your paper down on all 4 sides, but I prefer having rough edges to it, so it's just a personal preference. And then I'm going to have my vanishing point starting here in 1/3 of the paper. And if you know the rules of third, always have your focus point on the 1/3 points. And then here I'll have the windmill in the distance. And with this vanishing point, let's draw out the lines of the tulip. And then as it goes further in the distance, I'm going to have this width smaller, closer to each other. And let's do another one here. Okay, so this will be the simple pencil sketch, and let's dive into our painting. I'll be using a size 12 brush, and I think I'll just use a light blue for the skies, since we have lots of colorful tulips in the foreground. I'm going to have the sky as simple as possible. And then let's re-wet and have some soft wet on wet clouds. Again, feel free to tape your paper down if that's what you're used to, because it might have a little bit of paper warping as we are using quite a lot of heavy water wash on paper. But let's see how this one holds. And just going to drop colors in and leave some white spaces in between. That will be our clouds. Alright, and then maybe I'll grab a tissue just to create more white spaces for the clouds. Let's make a few more clouds at the bottom, some smaller ones in the distance. Like that. Let's darken this a little more. And be sure to use a soft tissue paper for this, because we want softer edges for the clouds. Instead of using a paper towel, you get more harsh, dry edges. So use a soft tissue paper for this. Okay, and that will be the skies. Now let's go down and paint our lilies. And maybe I'll just do a bit of some rainbow colors. Start with some yellow. And maybe I'll go with orange. So this is pretty loose and not much details. And I like you to have as much fun as you can playing with all these vibrant colors of summer. And I think I'm going over, maybe yes, let's use a darker orange. And again, I'll list down all the colors that I use in the description below. And I really like how it gives these dry brush strokes in certain areas. It gives a bit of texture. And then let's move on to red. And once this starts to dry out, I'm going to add some greens onto the lines that will be the stems of the lilies. And again, always keep in mind where it all starts from the vanishing point here, and then it goes outwards. And I'll do a little bit of lavender. Feel free to play around with the colors. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the colors that I used here. And then let's go for a darker purple. Okay, and start adding in some greens. So let's switch over to a smaller brush. I'm using size 6. And let's mix in a little bit of Sap Green in Greenish Umber, which is a dark green. Let's try. You can see that the paper has started to warp already. And I'm going to add the greens in. So be sure that your mixture is thick and not too watery, because you can see there's some blooms happening here. And then we have this bloom, so I'm going to dry off this brush with a clean dry brush. I'm going to lift this up like so. So this side of the paper is already dry, so we get these harsher lines. But that's fine. Okay, and then I think I'm going to add back some colors here because I left it out previously. And the same with the red. Alright, and then now that I see once the paper dry, the colors lighten almost, I think I'd say more than 30% lighter. So I'm going in again to darken and lay out another layer just to apply more pigments onto it. But you don't need to repeat this step if your paper holds the vibrancy when it dries. So I'm just quickly going to cover these areas. And while it's still wet, I'm going to splatter in some water, give it a bit of effect. And let's do the same for this area. I'm going to reapply another layer of paints. And to give it a little bit of texture, I'm going to paint in with brush strokes like so to give a little bit of texture. And as it comes closer to the bottom of the page, I'm going to make these brush strokes a little bigger. And before it dries out, I'm going to switch to a size 8 brush, and then let's add in some brush strokes. We have some of the petals, so let's do that. I'm going to again build up more textures. So grabbing more pigments in your brush, and then I'm going to lay in dots like this, some horizontal strokes and some dots to make it a little busy instead of a flat. And I'm only applying it to areas that are further down the page. So basically vertical strokes like this. And you can see that my paper is still wet. And let's add a slightly darker red So by doing this, it makes it look a little busy and gives the illusion of the florals. If it's already dry, just gently wet it over like this and then apply the paints. Now it looks less flat and we can see the illusion of the tulips. And then as it goes further behind, it becomes less visible. Let's do with this. So this one is dry. I'm going to just wet it a little bit. So if you decided not to tape your paper like what I'm doing here, and not to worry if your paper started warping like this, not to worry if it starts to bend. Later we will dry it all up with a hairdryer, and once that's done, the paper will be flat again. Okay, and I think we are done with the foreground. Maybe I'll add a few more splatters. Let's cover the skies. Okay, and then right now let's add in some trees in the background. So again, I'm going to want this to have a very soft looking trees, so I'm going to re-wet this area just near the horizon. And then let's lift this up and paint in the grass. So I'll just take Sap Green and I'll mix in a little bit of Cobalt Blue. So by mixing in Cobalt Blue, I am making my greens a little cooler. And with cooler colors, it creates distance in our vision since we have it in the background. So by lifting the page up, it prevents the greens from going all the way up. So I want it having a controlled bleed so it doesn't bleed too much upwards. And let's change the green a little bit. I'm going to add a bit of yellow. So I always like to play around with my greens by using Sap Green as my base and then adding cooler colors like blues or warmer colors like the reds to give it a different hue. And if you'd like to know more on how I mix my greens, I talk about how to play around and get a huge variety of greens without having to buy all the green tubes that are available. I will link the tutorial up in the card or in the description below, so do check it out. You can see that it bleeds out very nicely, giving us that very soft background in the distance. And then I'll make it darker again at the bottom near the horizon to give a little bit of depth. So using a darker green. Keeping it very close at the bottom near the horizon. So for this part, I'm adding more pigments into my mixture so it is less watery. And then let's straighten out the horizon. Okay, and then before we proceed to paint the windmill, I'm going to give it a quick dry. Alright, and I've already dried my paper and you can see that it doesn't warp as much as it did earlier. It's Now back to its flat surface, and then let's go into paint in the windmill. I'm going to use a mixture of burnt umber and burnt sepia. So let's have the sun coming from the left, and I'm going to keep it darker on the right side of the windmill. So I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow on the left to make it a little warmer. And then I'm going to darken this area on the right and give it a little bit of a shadow. And I'm using sepia with a little bit of neutral tint for the shadows. And here I'm using neutral tint and using a very fine tip of the brush, drawing the lines. And I'm going to do it with broken lines, give it a bit of a character to the windmill. And then on this side, since it's closer to the sun, I'm going to use a warmer color of the brown instead of the darker sepia and neutral tint. I'm going in with a bit of burned sienna and yellow ochre. Alright, and let's give this another quick dry. And then I'm going to take my white ink pen to bring back some of the highlights, especially here where it's in the dark. If you do not have a white ink pen, feel free to use a white gouache. If you have, that will do as well. But for convenience sake, I'll just use this ink pen. And let's do some on the grass areas as well. Just going to put the little dots, bring back some of the highlights where it looks flat, and bringing back some white areas to it will lighten the whole area. Not too much, be careful not to overdo this. So I'm just putting it in areas where it looks darker. And here we can see it's pretty dark, so I'm going to add a little bit. And I don't think I will add any on the color areas because it doesn't stand out really much. It only stands out in darker areas like around the shadows. Alright, and let's finish off with some dry splatters. And then I'll do a little bit more purple. So at this stage, I am adding splatters, and you can see that it stands out more because the paper is completely dry as compared to what we did earlier when the paper is still wet. We had more soft splatters, but now we have this harsher splatters. And a bit of orange. And I still feel that the painting lacked more highlights. And let's give this a try. Let's take gouache and add some splatter in. Yeah, this looks a lot better right now with the white highlights. And I'm going to manually add a bit more dots around. So this is our final painting. I really enjoyed painting this. Overall, it gives a very peaceful scenery, and I like that at the same time it has vibrant rainbow colors in the tulips. And especially towards the end, after adding these white splatters of gouache, it brings the whole piece out. It makes it pop a little more and bring back the highlights into the overall painting. And in terms of the sketchbook wise, because the nature of the paper is slightly on the creamy side, it is not as bright white as the usual papers that I work on. Like you can see here, this one, I'm not sure if it's visible under the screen, but this one is brighter, whiter than this paper here. This is slightly more of a creamy finish. Maybe that's why the color doesn't turn out as vibrant as I expected it to be. And also, as you see during my painting process earlier, I had to relay a second layer of colors onto the tulip areas. I had to add on another layer of these purple, reds and orange to bring out the colors more. And I think that's because as the paper dries, it dries very much lighter. So one thing to note is that during the first wash, lay out as much pigments as you can because it will then dry out lighter. Otherwise, overall, I enjoyed painting on this sketchbook, and I have many more pages to go. So if you're interested to see me fill up this sketchbook, do stay tuned for my future videos. And if you're still here, thank you very much for staying all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do give it a try and help to support by liking and subscribing to my channel. And I will see you next week.